I hesitate to begin with a confession because I don't know what standing that puts me in as a preacher with you, the congregation, but I'm going to go for it anyways, trusting that you can hold this with me and offer me grace just as I've been seeking grace all along while this has been happening. I had a neighbor for several years since we moved into our house back in 2021 who was particularly difficult for me to love. And then every Sunday when I get to Alamo Heights, we say, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." And it really puts me in a bind, taking those words seriously and then going home, pulling in the driveway, looking at the house next door and realizing, I don't know if I can live up to these words. I don't know if I can live into them. And every single day it was a challenge. This neighbor of mine had a very different lifestyle from the one we were living, kept very different hours from the ones we kept, waking and sleeping, and invited all kinds of people to come over to his house at all hours of the day to partake in particular kinds of activities that we don't partake in our family. It was a challenge to love my neighbor as myself. I remember back in March of 2023, my wife and I were woken up with a pounding on our front door and a ringing of our doorbell. We didn't know what was going on. We're half awake, and so we step to the front door, and I see it's my neighbor at the door with one of his friends, and they look kind of panicked and out of breath, and so I open the door, and they point to our street, and they say, "You have a giant tree limb that just fell across the street." Well, I was kind of half awake and putting the pieces together, but my first thought was, what am I supposed to do about that? If it's giant, I can't move it. I don't have any equipment. Why are you telling me this right now? Let's worry about it when daylight comes. Well, he proceeded, before I could even get a word in, to say, "I have a chainsaw. Don't worry, I'll fire it up and I'll start cutting the pieces and we can move them out of the street." So we did. For an hour in the middle of the night, we cut up the pieces and moved them and cleared the road so that cars could drive by once sunlight dawned. This was on Ash Wednesday of 2023. I was going to be up for the early morning service at the church I was previously serving at, and it was quite a way to start my season of Lent. But even more than that, it hit something in my soul when I realized that this neighbor was better at loving me in concrete, tactile ways than I had ever been able to love him. That I had thought about love, and I had wrestled with this concept when it came to my neighbor, and I decided that loving him would be easiest with distance between us, even more distance than the 23 feet between our houses. That I could love him if I just stayed out of contact. If I stayed out of his way and avoided him, it would be easiest for me to love him as I love myself. But for this neighbor, he showed up with a chainsaw at 12:30 in the morning, ready to go to work on this fallen limb just for me. If you notice today, John 13's passage begins with these words. "When he had gone out," Jesus said. Who's the he in that sentence? Well, if you look right above this passage in John 13, Jesus sends Judas out of the upper room to go do what he was already set on doing, to go hand Jesus over to the religious authorities and the soldiers, to thus begin this series of events that leads in Jesus' arrest, torture, and execution. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified." In John's telling of Jesus' life and ministry, and especially in the events of his crucifixion, John is very clear that Jesus never loses command of the situation, that he knows what's going to happen and indeed allows it to happen, even allowing Judas, sending him to go start this domino effect in his life. Now, the disciples have no idea what's going on in this moment, but Jesus does. And we, as his disciples, 2,000 years later, also know what is going to happen to him in just a few chapters. Isn't it fascinating that Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen, and he begins this chapters-long speech with this particular idea? A new commandment I give you, love one another. He could have said anything in light of the events that were about to fall onto him. Jesus knew he wasn't getting out of life alive. And yet he begins this parting speech to his closest followers with the words, love one another. Love one another. That's a phrase that sticks out to us modern listeners 2,000 years later. We live in a culture that's lovesick with love. We sing about it. We watch movies about it. We read books about it. We think and dream and talk about it. Love is all around us. Love is all you need, we say to each other. And yet, if we take just one step back, isn't it funny that love is not the only thing Jesus talks about? At least not the kind of general, universal love that we often picture and worship in this culture. Stanley Hauerwas, who is a retired professor at Duke Divinity School, says if we reduce Jesus to a preacher of love and understanding, don't we think it's strange that that's what got him put up on the cross? For who would object to a message of love? There must be something else going on here when Jesus says love one another. And yet, in the world we live in, particularly in the church we are a part of, not just this congregation, but the American church or the worldwide church, we reduce Christianity just to this basic principle. Love one another. It's as easy as that. In fact, I saw a sign this week while I was thinking about this sermon. I drove by and saw a sign that says, "Be the love you want." And while I appreciate the pithiness of that statement, it could fit on a bumper sticker, I think we need to really think carefully about what that means. For the Gospels tell us that if we have untrained, unguided love, the way we love other people could be disastrous, or at least have unintended consequences, even though we are trying with our greatest sincereness. Think about a couple of examples with me. What do we tell people that we are in love with? We might say phrases like, "You complete me." Now, analyze that statement with me. You fit into my life and meet my needs so that I can feel whole. We don't mean to say it, but this is what we are saying. You are a tool that serves my life's purposes and desires. You complete me, whether we mean it or not, reduces the other person just to fit into our life like a puzzle piece, where we are still the center of the picture. I know that there are churches out there who support nonprofits by calling nonprofits and saying, "This is what we want to do for you, nonprofit. We're going to show up and we're going to bring all these things to you, and it's going to be fun. We're going to take pictures and put it on social media, and then we'll go home and you'll have all this great stuff." But the churches don't even pause and ask, "What is it that you need?" Instead, they lead with, "This is what we want to do for you." Love is guided by all kinds of worldviews, by all kinds of histories, by all kinds of cultures. Love has all kinds of meanings. And so if we tell people, "Love the way you want to be loved," well, that looks very different between me and you, doesn't it? And the way I might love you, you might not exactly receive as love. If we reduce love to this general, abstract, universal notion, then it can mean everything, and therefore it can mean nothing at all. I'm reminded of the story of Professor Karl Barth, who is a German-Swiss theologian, and he was preaching at a church in the United States one Sunday, and after the service, a professor of astrology came up to Professor Barth and said, "Professor Barth, that was a great sermon. Now, as a professor of astrology, I've been thinking about Christianity for a while, and I think it can all be reduced down to this one simple principle: do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Karl Barth, always quick with a response, said, "Professor of astrology, I'm a professor of theology, and I've been thinking about astronomy. Astrology would be very different. Professor of astronomy, let's fit that into whatever I've said before. Professor Barth said, I am a professor of theology, and I've been thinking about astronomy for a while. And I think we can reduce the entire study of astronomy to this one simple phrase: twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." What do we mean when we say love? What does it mean when Jesus tells us, love one another? What kind of love are we talking about? And more importantly, what kind of love are we not talking about? Well, could it be a kind of love that eventually gets you on the cross? I think John 13 comes to us as a kind of warning. This new commandment, love is not new to these folks who are from God's people, from the Jewish people. Love has been around forever. Heck, we just said, love your neighbor as yourself. That comes from Leviticus. The newness, we might think, comes from the standard. Maybe instead of saying love your neighbor as yourself, we are now saying love one another as Jesus loved you. With that in mind, we might think this commandment is a kind of warning. That if we're going to love the way Jesus loves, if we're going to embrace and practice the kind of love that Jesus has instituted, the love that recognizes the commonality between me and you and yet respects you as a complete other, and is willing to put you ahead of me, if we're going to practice that kind of love, it could have consequences. It could cause us some problems. It could get me into some suffering and some pain, depending on how willing I'm able to be in relationship with you. So for me and my neighbor, when I practice this general universal ethic of love, it costs me nothing. And yet for my neighbor, he gets up at 12:30 and cuts up a tree limb for an hour. For me, who doesn't even care about him. What kind of love are we talking about? A love that puts the hopes and dreams and fears and needs of another ahead of ourselves. This new commandment gets you in the crosshairs of some folks pretty quick. In a world that practices violence, we are called to be a people of nonviolence. That goes against the current of how things are ordered in our world. It means being willing to be dispossessed of all of our possessions, realizing that those don't define us. Instead, we have a different kind of identity. It means being willing to be generous, whether it's volunteering with VBS, giving of ourselves to folks who are in need, maybe taking time to listen to those who have been ignored, or maybe that you yourself have ignored up until this point. This kind of love costs something. It cost Jesus his life. Love one another as I have loved you is a tough standard. I wonder if you've ever been able to meet that standard before. Loving another person the way that Christ loves you. Being willing to give up everything, even your life, not just for a friend, but for an enemy. I confess again, that is kind of daunting. It feels overwhelming. Jesus, I don't know if I can do that. Lord, have mercy. It's going to take a community to be trained in that kind of love. After all, the word disciple means one who is willing to be disciplined, does it not? To be shaped and recast and reformed and healed of not just our behaviors, but even our character, our desires. To do the long, hard work of obedience together. This is not some kind of rugged individualism between me and Jesus. It's going to take you holding me accountable to even get close to that kind of love. I also think John 13 comes to us as a promise, not just as a warning. If you heard the passage of scripture that Janet read earlier, chapter 52 and 53 of Isaiah, we often refer to this as the suffering servant passage from the prophet Isaiah, and describing a character who comes among the people and who is not particularly captivating or intriguing. And yet this person pours out their life for the sake of others, and God honors that and lifts that person up because of their selfless sacrifice. Jesus is calling us to that particular life. It was a life he himself embodied, and as his disciples, we have to trust that that is actually how the world works, even when all the currents of our world say the opposite. It's a hard thing to do. And yet the promise is this, that we don't have to do it by ourselves. Not just that we have a community of fellow disciples practicing the way, but that we don't even have to conjure up this kind of love by our own power. I find this fascinating, that if you were to look at the Greek of John 13 and you went to verse 34, this is what it says in our translation. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. Did you also know that the way the Greek is written, you can translate it a different way? You can say, I have loved you in order that you may also love one another. Do you hear the difference? I have loved you in order that you may also love one another. Jesus is not just the standard of the kind of love we are to become, but Jesus becomes the source, the first mover, the one who sets into motion the kind of love that is pouring out upon our world. It's as if Jesus becomes the headwaters of a rushing current of compassion that flows through you and into the lives, not just of the people here in this room or on live stream, but our neighbors and even our enemies, that love is always flowing. It never runs dry. It's never diverted or stopped up. It continues for thousands of years. In the beginning was love, and it continues to pour out, that we can jump into its current at any minute and be covered in it and share it with others. That the kind of love Jesus calls us to doesn't demand our perfection, but it does demand our persistence. That we keep showing up time after time with the neighbor that we can't stand, with the church member we're sitting next to that we never talked to before, maybe with our spouse or our kids, our coworker, whoever it is, that time after time we have the opportunity right in front of us to be the kind of love that exists not just for our sake, but for the sake of the world. The kind of love that has redefined what it means to be a creature in God's created universe. That love is now the new reality of all things. In this Easter season, when we celebrate and honor the resurrection of Christ, we can look back on some of these words he spoke before he was crucified. And we can see them not just as wishful thinking, but as promises that can be kept. Because Jesus is alive. He's alive. Which means the words that he spoke to us while he was still with us continue to live on, continue to be effective. Because nothing gets in between him and us. No thing, not even death. So when he says, you may love because I have first loved you, that is not just a statement of intent. That is a guarantee. That we can indeed be the kind of love that he is for us. That's the kind of love that defines those who follow Jesus. That's the kind of love we're talking about. That's the kind of love that the world desperately needs.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Weekly Teaching. To watch the full live stream of this worship service, you can view all archived streams at the Alamo Heights UMC YouTube channel. If you have any questions, email us at podcasts@ahumc.org. That's podcasts@ahumc.org. You can also visit our website, ahumc.org, anytime. Any related links are also in this episode's show notes. Again, thank you so much for being a listener. We truly appreciate your time.